were 1,411 juveniles aged 7 to 14 sentenced at the Old Bailey to transportation to Australia in the period of 1816 to 1850. Only 77 of those sentenced to transportation were female, compared with 1,333 males. This graph also shows a proportional increase of transportee sentences with age. The key word here is sentence, as not all were sent. The youngest juvenile actually transported in this sample is George Fenby. While his transportation records state that he was 10, his birth records show he was 12 years old when he first set foot in Van Diemen's Land. One of Hannah Fenby's 5 children, George was convicted of simple larceny, stealing 2 pairs of shoes from a shop with his mother at what they believed was the age of 9. Presumably, they lied about his age in the hope of a lenient sentence. They did not receive one. George and his mother, aged 43, were both transported for 7 years. Hannah on board the Eliza in 1829 and George on board the Manulus in 1830. Except in the odd coining or fraud offence, all offences were theft. The most common offences were grand larceny, then, due to changes in the law, simple larceny. Pickpocketing was also prevalent, but this is skewed by male offenders. This is highlighted when we break down offences by gender. Still, the most common offences remain grand and simple larceny. It is also noteworthy that shoplifting is not prevalent in either sex. But if we take into account the spatial environment of the crime, the most common place to steal from, in both genders, was the shop. Fenbys are an example of this. Why was Fenby selected from the Euryalus Hulk for actual transportation when generally boys were kept until they were aged 14? During Fenby's colonial assignments and imprisonment, he was absent, riotous, and improper in conduct, for which he received repeated lashes. In fact, it was reported that Fenby took liberties with his master's 6-year-old daughter, resulting in him being put in the worst class of boys at Point Pure. It is possible that Fenby's behaviour in the colony is indicative of his behaviour while imprisoned before transportation, resulting in his early selection. After receiving a certificate of freedom in 1836, he made his way to Victoria, appearing in the papers in 1842, charged with attempted highway robbery. We can be relatively confident that it was him because it states his alias was Timms, the name used by his mother in this newspaper notice addressed to him in 1850. It is unclear what became of this charge, but Fenby clearly lived an eventful life until his death in 1893. The average lifespan for males was 58 years. Fenby lived until he was 75. The average lifespan for females was 62. Hannah Fenby died aged 69. While George was badly behaved, he was not a repeat offender before he was transported. Notably, only 26% of male juveniles had former indictments or convictions acknowledged at court, compared with 49% of females. This suggests a greater reluctance to sentence girls to transportation unless they were known to be repeat offenders. While some thought many juveniles too diminutive to be transported, the idea that bad behaviour and previous offences led to a greater chance of those sentenced to 7 years actually being transported does have support in the 1812 parliamentary paper. However, this report also contains contradictions over colonial burden and utility. So more questions are raised than answered. Through further research, I hope to find out on what basis were juveniles sentenced to imprisonment or transportation, and how many were actually transported and how were they selected.